Loriel Mountains, Soxes 270, year 962.
Rennan Voss had just reached the bottom of the Loriel Mountains. It had been a long journey, but now he could finally sit down and rest for the day. The cold had suddenly turned into a warmth that was so contrasted he wanted to discover more of it. Rennan pulled out some firewood and built a small fire. He pulled out a cloth from his rucksack, just enough to put some distance between himself and the ground. He did not need more. All the years of travel had made a bed uncomfortable for him at this point. As the fire was crackling and the night had set, he pulled out a long dried sausage. His knife was sharp, and he cut slices of the sausage and stuffed the delicious meat in his mouth. Rennan reached over and opened his bag, pulled out the diary. The Adventures of Rennan Voss, a naturalist of Galadria, it said on the front. The feather he used to write with was a big eagle feather he had found in northern Loriel many years ago. The strength of that feather could withstand anything. He dipped the pen in ink and started writing.
It was a long time since I had seen them. I did grow up in the southeast Loriel Mountains, in the rebel town of Barackas, so they were a part of my life. But we had driven them away over many years, and now they were not a part of regular Barackan life anymore. The cliff gliders. I had to see them again, and better yet, I had to sketch them. My annual, or more occasional, homecoming to Barackas had made me think of them. After the sea creature I named bolters that I found outside of Kostos, I had been thinking about the cliff gliders, large hounds that attack from above and glide in the air. I just had to get close to one and study it, to get the drawing clear. I had so many questions as well. How did they live? How did they hunt? Were they social? All of these questions were stirring in my mind, if I could just get a serious look at them. But there were some challenges. After Barackas had grown so much, we had pushed them away, killed them, hunted them, like they were some invasive species upon the land that we invaded. I started out walking down the mountains using the road that runs to Krytas by the coast. I knew that I would have to get into the western part of the southern Loriel Mountains. We had driven the glider hounds away, and the only way they could have gone was west or north, and north would be a much harder journey. The road down from Barackas is always a joy to behold. The long road snaking down the mountain, with passes where you can look down on each side, and it is so far that you almost cannot see the bottom of it. The grey stone of the landscape towering above like a forest in stone, with the brightness of stylon shining purple like strips of magic in some of the mountainside. The power stone that gives the people of Barackas their strength of independence, or at least that is what is believed. The stylon is not as strong as other power stones, one of the healthy ones, I would say. The road to Krytas is filled with people from all over Galadria, though I would think most are from Dorian, as the people of the Westerlands are few in this part of the world. People dragging large oxen pulling carts, and others with hounds larger than lions carrying their cargo up the mountains. As people have flocked to Barackas, there have been more and more throughout the oscillations, and more there would be. It was not long before I reached the point far down the mountains where the stone forest above was behind me, and the grey was sparkled with green, rolling over the landscape, the temperature turning into a comfortable warmth. That was welcome, I admit, after spending days in my birthplace in the mountains.
I try to view my studies as a continuous one.
No line in the sand or stone where I cross and then the adventure begins. I sketch and study the stones, the lay of the road, and the nature of the people walking on it. Galadria is a universe, a puzzle that has many pieces, and I am the one that is discovering it for the first time. Or so it feels, at least, and in some cases that is true. But the adventure is always on. Now, however, I came to the point where some would consider the adventure to begin.
I had to stray off the road connecting the ocean to Barackas and walk into what some would call the wilderness. I could sit a late night with a cup of ale in my hand in a dimly lit tavern and disagree with any stranger about that for the whole night, because they may have not seen wilderness if they considered these smaller tracks that. But it was considered that.
I strayed off to the west and the tracks became smaller and unused. Swirling through the landscape, high pines with bright and healthy red trunks spread throughout, and the hills sharp up and down. I camped where I could and sketched what I could see. A red-backed stone critter running through the rocks, many of them, coming up and gathering around me as long as I stood still. Curious little creatures. The moment I made a small movement, they would all scatter and run into shelter, as if I was going to run after every single one of them. I suppose that is how they have survived to this point, confusing whatever predator was trying to catch them and making it too hard to decide on which one to go after. But the predator evolved too. The sting hawk that sends out waves of sound or something. It has been hard to gather what it is because I cannot hear it. But I have been observing them, and they somehow paralyze their prey from the sky, like they are shooting some invisible beam from their body or mouth and shocking whatever is below them. Curious. I would love to be able to drink a potion or look through something so I could actually see what the beam is. Maybe it is something that I have not yet understood, and maybe I never will. The nights out here are quiet, though I hear the life around me. I think the creatures here, and in many other places in Dorian, have somehow long understood that humans are dangerous. A sun lizard could easily take me as a single human. Out here, I am vulnerable. But it is like they understand that we are not to be messed with. Maybe they have learned their lesson. Sometimes on my journeys I get a feeling of awe. When I look up at the night sky, especially from a secluded cliff or a hill where I can see the sky meet the horizon, and there are thousands of stars out there. I try to see or imagine what they are. Many people have their theories, and there are official explanations, but I have been to many places and seen enough not to take them as absolute. I do not know what they are, those bright diamonds hanging above us in the night. And sometimes I would just like to keep it that way. The wonder itself can occupy me for hours. On the 8th day of my travel, I reached what would be considered the lowest geographical point of my journey. I could see the ocean down there, stretching endlessly out to the unknown. As I was heading west, I was tracking along that endless horizon, the blue water of the Custo Bay, the crystal water, warm to swim in and rich with life. It is so vast, and it amazes me that I can walk for days and the water just follows me there, to my left, like it is a companion. Big, vast and powerful. I would like to study the spirit of it once, but that is for another time, as it is hard to know where to begin. The terrain changed on the 9th day. The hills became steeper and the pines thinned out, replaced by shorter, twisted trees that clung to the rock with roots like fingers gripping a ledge. The soil turned shallow and pale, more stone than earth. I could feel the altitude returning beneath my feet. Not the high cold of Barackas, but something rougher, less organized. These were not mountains that anyone had bothered to name or chart. They were the leftover bones of the Loriel range, running west toward the sea, getting wilder and less hospitable with every step. I found animal tracks in the dust between the rocks. Large paw prints, wider than my hand with fingers spread. The toes were long and splayed in a way that I had not seen in any hound or wolf. There was something wrong about them, or rather, something unfamiliar. The weight distribution was heavy at the front, like the creature leaned forward when it walked. I knelt and sketched the print in my diary, noting the depth and spacing. Whatever had made this was not small. And it had been here recently, because the edges of the print were still sharp
and the dust had not yet blown back in to soften them.
I followed the tracks west for most of the day. They led me along a ridgeline that dropped away steeply on the southern side toward the ocean, which I could still see far below, flat and silver in the afternoon haze. On the northern side, the ridge fell into a deep gorge, narrow and dark, with cliff walls that rose sheer on both sides. The kind of place where the sun only reaches the bottom for an hour or two a day. The kind of place where things live that do not want to be found. I made camp on the ridge that evening, setting my fire in a shallow depression between two large rocks where the wind could not reach it. I did not want to go into the gorge in fading light. Whatever was down there, I wanted to meet it with the sun behind me and a clear path to walk away on. That is a rule I made for myself many years ago. Never meet a predator on its terms. Meet it on yours, or do not meet it at all. I ate the last of my sausage that night and regretted not bringing more. I had dried oats and some hard bread, and I had passed a stream an hour back, so water was not a concern. But the sausage had been a comfort, and comforts are worth more than people think when you are alone in a place that does not know your name. I found the first kill site on the morning of the 10th day. It was at the base of the northern cliff wall, on a flat shelf of rock about 20 paces wide. A mountain goat, or what was left of one. The bones had been picked clean but not scattered. They were still roughly in the shape of the animal lying on its side, which told me the predator had eaten where it killed, rather than dragging the carcass somewhere else. That is significant. A wolf drags. A bear drags. Whatever killed this goat was confident enough in its position that it did not need to move the food to a safer place. It ate where it landed. Where it landed. I wrote those words and then sat looking at them for a while. The cliff wall above the kill site rose straight up, maybe 60 or 70 meters. I tilted my head back and studied it. Grey rock, cracked and ledged, with dark patches here and there where moisture had stained the stone or where shadow collected in the deeper crevices. I counted the ledges. There were many, at different heights, some barely wide enough for a bird to rest on, others broad enough for something much larger. I looked at the dark patches again. Some of them were shadows. Some of them were stains. And some of them, I realized, were not shadows or stains at all. They were too uniform, too still. The color was wrong for stone, not grey but grey-brown, mottled, with a texture that was not mineral. I pulled out my looking glass, the small brass one I bought in Ruleport years ago, and held it to my eye. Fur. I was looking at fur. The dark patch on the ledge about 40 meters up was a creature, pressed flat against the rock, with something folded along its sides like a collapsed cloak. It was motionless. Utterly, completely motionless, the way only a hunting animal can be. Not sleeping. Waiting. I could just make out the shape of a broad skull, a heavy jaw, and two enormous ears pressed back against the head. The ears were membranous and thin, like a bat's, and even folded back, I could see they were disproportionately large for the skull. I lowered the glass and looked at the cliff face with my bare eyes. It disappeared. It was just a dark patch of stone again. I raised the glass. There it was. A cliff glider, no more than 40 meters above me, lying on a ledge in plain sight, invisible. My hands were shaking. I do not say that with shame. I say it because it is true, and because a naturalist who lies about his own reactions is useless to anyone who reads his work after him. My hands were shaking because I had wanted to see this creature for 20 years, and there it was, alive, breathing, waiting on a cliff face in the western Loriel mountains where nobody had ever bothered to look. I sat down very slowly. I opened my diary to a clean page, and I began to draw. I spent 3 days at the base of that cliff. The first day I did nothing but observe.
I sat against a rock on the far side of the shelf, maybe 30 paces from the cliff wall, and I watched. I did not sketch. I did not write. I just watched. Because I have learned over the years that the first thing you see is almost never the whole thing. You have to wait for the animal to show you what it is. You cannot rush that.
By midday, I had counted 5 of them on the cliff face. 5 dark patches at different heights, spaced unevenly across the wall. The lowest was about 15 meters up. The highest was near the top, perhaps 60 meters, on a ledge so narrow I could not understand how the creature fit on it. They were all motionless, all facing outward, all waiting. 5. I wrote that number down and underlined it. There is a difference between a pair and a pack, and 5 is a pack. 5 means coordination. 5 means strategy. 5 means that these creatures do not hunt alone, and that whatever they do when they leave those ledges, they do it together. The body, as far as I could tell through the looking glass, was built nothing like a wolf. The front shoulders were heavy and powerful, sloping down to lighter, narrower hindquarters. More like a hyena than a hound, built for a single explosive effort rather than a long chase. The forelegs were thick, and even at rest I could see the length of the toes. They were elongated, curved, gripping the rock ledge with what looked like hooked claws that retracted into the paw. Climbing claws. These creatures did not jump to their ledges, they climbed, the way a cat climbs, digging into the rock face and pulling themselves up. The most striking feature, even from a distance, was the membrane. A thick fold of skin running from the wrists of the front legs to the hips of the back legs, hanging in loose, ragged folds along the creature's sides, like a collapsed cloak. When the wind caught it, the membrane shifted and rippled slightly, and I could see that it was not fur-covered, but bare, leathery, like the skin of a bat's wing. I made 3 sketches of the membrane at rest, trying to capture the way it draped and folded. It was ungainly. It made the creature look ragged and formless when it was still, like a pile of old cloth left on a ledge. I suspected it would look very different in motion. The tail was long and stiff, flattened from side to side, and it extended straight back from the hindquarters without curving or drooping. It did not move the way a dog's tail moves. It did not wag or twitch. It sat rigid behind the creature like a plank, and I guessed immediately that it served a mechanical purpose rather than an expressive one. A rudder, perhaps. Something to steer with. And the ears. The ears were extraordinary. Even folded back against the skull, they were the largest ears I have ever seen on a predator of that size. Thin, membranous, veined, turning very slightly even while the rest of the body was motionless. Scanning. Listening. I watched one ear rotate slowly to the left while the other stayed fixed, and I understood then that they could move independently of each other. I have seen this in owls, but never in a mammal of this size. The ears were not for display. They were instruments. On the second evening, I saw them hunt. The light was failing. The sun had dropped behind the ridge to the west, and the gorge was filling with that heavy, blue-grey dusk that comes before full dark. I was about to pack my glass away and start my fire when I noticed that the dark patches on the cliff had changed. Not moved, changed. They were somehow more present, more alert, though I could not have told you what specifically was different. The shapes were the same, the positions were the same, but something in the quality of their stillness had shifted. The way you can feel someone watching you in a room, even if they have not moved. Then the ears came forward, all 5 of them simultaneously. 10 enormous bat-like ears unfolding from the skulls and rotating outward, fanning open like dark flowers. The ears were scanning, turning, adjusting. They had heard something I could not hear. Something was coming. I pressed myself back against my rock and held the looking glass steady with both hands. My heart was beating in my throat. A herd of mountain goats appeared at the far end of the gorge floor, picking their way over the rocks toward the shelf where the old kill had been. 7 or 8 of them, moving in a loose group, the lead animal stopping every few steps to test the air. They were cautious, but not alarmed. They had come this way before. They knew the path. They did not look up. The first cliff glider launched from the highest ledge. There was no sound, no bark, no cry, no warning of any kind. The creature simply stepped off the ledge and fell. For half a second it dropped like a stone, and then the membrane snapped taut between its legs, and it was gliding, silent, angled steeply downward with its tail held flat and rigid behind it, steering. The speed was extraordinary. It did not float. It dove. It came down on the lead goat at an angle that must have been close to 45 degrees, and it hit with an impact I could hear from 30 paces away. The goat went down. The claws, those long, curved, hooked claws I had sketched from the paw prints, locked into the goat's shoulders and held. The herd exploded in every direction, and that is when the others launched. Not all at once, in sequence. The second glider came from a ledge about 10 meters lower than the first, angling to the right, cutting off a goat that had bolted toward the gorge wall. The third came from the left, lower still. The fourth from directly above, dropping almost vertically. Within 3 seconds, 4 goats were on the ground. The fifth glider, the one on the lowest ledge, did not launch. It watched. I do not know if it was a reserve, a lookout, or simply not hungry, but it watched the entire hunt from its ledge without moving. The whole thing was over in less than 10 seconds. From the moment the first glider left its ledge to the moment the last goat stopped moving, I could have counted to 8, maybe 9. The silence afterward was enormous. The gorge was suddenly still except for the sound of feeding, which was wet and quiet and methodical. I sat behind my rock for a long time. I did not sketch. I did not write. I just sat there, because what I had seen was so efficient, so perfectly coordinated, that I needed time to let it settle in my mind before I put any of it on paper. The positioning at different heights, the staggered launch, the angles calculated so that each glider cut off a different escape route, the silence, the devastating, absolute silence of 5 predators falling out of the sky. I thought about the old stories from Barackas, the ones the miners told about the cliff hounds that took men from the mountain paths. I'd always assumed those stories were exaggerated, campfire talk, the kind of fear that grows in the telling. I sat behind my rock in the darkening gorge, and I did not think they were exaggerated anymore. I thought they were, if anything, understated. I stayed for a 3rd day. By then the gliders had returned to their ledges, and the remains of the goats had been picked to bone on the gorge floor. I spent the morning making detailed sketches. I drew the body shape from memory, and from what I could see through the glass, the heavy shoulders, the sloping hindquarters, the ragged membrane at rest. I drew the paw with its elongated toes and hooked claws, extrapolating from the prints I had measured. I drew the skull as best I could, the broad, flat head with its heavy jaw and those impossible ears, rotated forward in the hunting position. I drew the glide. I drew it 3 times, trying to get the angle right, the way the membrane snapped taut and the body flattened and the tail held straight and rigid as a plank. On the 3rd attempt, I was satisfied. The shape in flight was nothing like the shape at rest. At rest, the cliff glider looked ragged and formless, like a pile of wet cloth thrown on a rock. In the air, it was clean, precise, geometric. A triangle of stretched skin with a skull at the front and a rudder at the back, falling at exactly the angle it intended to fall, arriving at exactly the point
it intended to arrive.
I'm not a sentimental man when it comes to predators. I have watched enough killing in the wild to understand that it is not cruel and it is not kind. It is just what happens. The goat does not hate the glider does not hate the goat. One eats and one is eaten, and the mountains do not care either way. But I will say this, I have never seen anything hunt with such precision. The coordination between the 5 animals was not learned behavior in the way a dog learns to sit. It was deeper than that. It was built into them, the way a river is built into a valley. They did not communicate during the hunt. There was no signal, no call, no leader barking orders from the highest ledge. They simply knew. Each one knew where the others would go, and each one went where it was needed, and the result was a silence that fell from the sky and killed in 8 seconds.
I think about the Stylon sometimes, back in Barackas, and the way people say it gives the city its independence, and I wonder if the cliff gliders have something similar. Not a stone, not a mineral, but something in the rock or the air or the altitude of these western cliffs that allows 5 separate animals to function as one. Or perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps they are just very old as a species, and they have had a long time to figure it out. Perhaps coordination like that does not need magic. Perhaps it just needs time. I packed my things on the evening of the 3rd day and began the walk back east toward the road. The gliders were still on their ledges. I do not think they ever noticed me. Or, if they did not consider me worth the effort. I'm not sure which possibility I prefer. The walk back took 6 days. I followed the same tracks east through the red-trunked pines and the sharp hills, past the stone critters and the stinghawks, and eventually back to the road where the merchants and their oxen and their enormous hounds were still moving up and down between the coast and Barackas, as though nothing had happened. And I suppose nothing had, to them. I stopped at a tavern at the junction where the western tracks meet the main road. A small stone building with a low roof and a fire that smoked too much. I ordered ale and bread and sat in the corner and ate slowly and thought about what I had seen. The man at the next table was telling his companion about the dangers of the western hills, the wild animals, the cliffs, the lack of water. He called it wilderness. I sat there with my diary on the table and my ale in my hand, and I did not argue with him. I thought about it, but I did not argue. He was not wrong, exactly. It is wilderness. But wilderness is not what most people think it is. It is not chaos. It is not emptiness. It is a place where things have organized themselves without us, and the organization is so precise and so beautiful that we cannot see it unless we sit still long enough. 5 creatures on a cliff face, invisible, waiting, and then falling in perfect silence at exactly the right moment. That is not chaos. That is order of the highest kind. It just does not need our permission. I finished my ale and started the walk back up to Barackas. The road was long and steep, and the Stylon was glowing purple in the mountainside as the evening came, and I was tired and satisfied, and thinking about what I would write when I got home. I am writing it now. The fire is low. My feather is holding up. The cliff gliders of Loriel are real, and they are extraordinary, and they are exactly where we left them, on the cliffs we abandoned when we decided we needed the space more than they did. I hope we do not go looking for that space again. Rennan set down the feather and blew gently on the ink until it was dry. He closed the diary and placed it back in the bag. The fire had burned down to embers, and the night was warm and still around him. He lay back on the cloth and looked up at the stars, those bright diamonds he could not explain. And he did not try to explain them. He listened to the insects and the distant sound of something moving through the trees, and he thought about 5 dark shapes on a cliff face.
waiting in perfect silence for something to walk beneath them.
He was asleep before the last ember went out.